Strength doesn't feel like strength from the inside. It feels like a Tuesday you barely got through and told nobody about. You're not failing. You've been keeping the books wrong. So tonight, 8 signs, 8 specific behaviors that mean you are steadier than you have been telling yourself. You will recognize at least 5 of them. And the 8th is the one you have the most evidence for and have never once counted because you decided it didn't qualify. You told yourself you had no choice. Here is why you keep missing them. You've been measuring strength the way you'd measure a mood, by how it sits in your chest at the moment of action. But strength leaves no sensation behind. It leaves a record you have been writing in your own hand for years and have never once read back. We're going to read it. 8 entries, in order, because the last 4 only make sense after the first 4, and somewhere around the 4th, the whole idea turns over on itself. Sign 1. You act on the days the feeling never shows up. Strength is the distance between how you feel and what you do anyway. A man decides to learn guitar at 38. The case lives in the corner of the bedroom against the radiator. On the good days, he plays for an hour, and something in him says the word musician.
On the flat days, and most days are flat days, he lifts the guitar off the floor, plays 4 bars badly, feels the string bite the pad of his index finger, and puts it down again. 2 minutes. He counts those as failures. He logs them, privately, as evidence that he isn't serious. 18 months later, he can play. Ask him what built the calluses on his fingertips, and he'll tell you it was the hour-long days. He's wrong. Ask any teacher and you'll get the unglamorous answer. The fingertips harden from how often the string touches them, not how long. The 4-bar days did that. For a year and a half, he has been discounting the exact behavior that worked and crediting the behavior that merely felt good. This is the engine behind behavioral activation, one of the most reliably effective treatments there is for depression. You don't wait for the mood to move you. You move in the smallest available way and let the mood come along behind. Motivation isn't the fuel, it's the exhaust. It usually shows up after the first movement, which is why people who wait to feel ready wait forever. Epictetus drew the same line 2,000 years earlier. The feeling was never in your control. The next action always was. So stop grading your days by how they felt. Set a floor, the smallest version of the thing that still counts, and hit the floor on the worst days. 4 bars. 1 paragraph.
The shoes on, out the door, around the block. Which raises a question you've probably never put to yourself. If the flat days are the ones doing the construction, why do they feel like nothing at all? Because the payoff arrives late, and it arrives quietly, and by then you've stopped watching. That lag is where most people quit. The next sign runs on the same lag, in a different room, except there the whole thing is decided in about 4 seconds. Sign 2. You can hear the truth about yourself and stay in the room. 2 people get the same sentence in the same review. This section is unclear. The first hears a sentence about a section. She feels the sting. It does sting. And then she asks which paragraph. She rewrites it on Thursday morning with the coffee going cold beside the laptop, and she has forgotten the whole business by dinner. The second hears a sentence about himself. I am unclear. I am sloppy. They finally noticed what I've been hiding. Watch his face while the feedback is still being spoken. He stopped listening around the 4th word and started building the defense. He will spend the evening constructing an argument that nobody will ever hear, refining it in the shower, delivering it to the ceiling at 11 at night. Toughness had nothing to do with it. They heard 2 different-sized things.
June Tangney has spent a career separating guilt from shame at exactly that seam. Guilt says, I did a bad thing, and points toward repair. Shame says, I am a bad thing, and points toward hiding. Guilt keeps you in the room. Shame walks you out of it and dresses the exit up as dignity. Only one of those ever improves the work. So when the criticism lands, name its size before you do anything else. Say it in your head in plain words. This is about one section, not about me. Then ask one clarifying question before you defend a single thing. The question is the proof you're still standing. Consider what it costs to leave the room. Every real skill you have was handed to you by someone telling you something you didn't want to hear. A teacher, an editor, a foreman, a friend at the wrong moment. Walk out often enough and you don't just lose the correction, you lose access to the only people who will ever bother giving you one. Sign 3 asks for the same discomfort stretched over days instead of seconds. Sign 3. You can let something stay unresolved. Weak nerves demand an answer today. Think about bread in an oven. The heat is doing invisible work in there, and every time you open the door to check, the temperature drops and the loaf falls in the middle. That's most bad decisions. That's the door being opened. The 3 in the morning text sent purely to end a silence.
The mediocre job accepted in week 6 because the waiting had become unbearable, and the waiting was the whole test. The apology issued for something you did not do, offered up like a coin in a machine, just to make the tension in the room stop. None of those were decisions. They were sedatives, and they were priced like decisions. Consider a woman named Ruth, 41, sitting on the end of her sofa at 11:40 on a Wednesday night with a reply half-written. Her brother has sent a message about their mother's house, and it contains one line that is unfair in a way only family can manage. The cursor is blinking in the box. Her hands want the phone. At hour 2, she would have sent something accurate and unanswerable, and it would have been the last thing said between them for a year. Instead, she puts the phone face down on the arm of the sofa, gets up and washes 3 dishes that were already clean enough. She sleeps badly. At hour 26, she reads his message again in daylight at the kitchen table and sees the sentence underneath it, that he is frightened about money and has been for months. She writes 4 lines. He calls that evening. Nothing dramatic happened. Something was simply not destroyed, and no one but her will ever know that a decision was made at all. Psychologists call the drive underneath that urge the need for cognitive closure.
Ambiguity is so genuinely aversive to some nervous systems that a person will seize the first available answer simply to be done with the not knowing, and then spend 3 years living inside the answer they grabbed. Keats had a name for the opposite capacity, negative capability, the ability to remain in uncertainty, in mystery, in doubt, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. If you can sit with an unanswered message, an undecided move, a relationship in an unclear phase, you have it. So put a clock on the urge, 24 hours before you send, sign, or confront. You aren't being passive. You're refusing to trade a good outcome for immediate relief. Most of us can manage that when the pressure is slow. What breaks people is speed, the version of this that runs in the body in under a second, in front of other people, with no 24 hours available. And you have been reading that signal exactly backwards your entire adult life. Sign 4. Your body panics and you speak anyway. A woman stands up at a residence meeting to object to something that half the room privately agrees with and nobody has said. Her mouth is dry, her hands are cold, and her heartbeat is loud enough that she can hear it behind her own voice. There is a fine tremor in the sheet of paper she's holding, which is why she sets it down on the chair. She says the sentence. She sits.
She goes home certain that she humiliated herself in front of 40 neighbors. 2 days later, 2 of them tell her she was the calm one. She is wrong about the room in 2 separate ways. From the outside, almost none of that inventory was visible. The tremor she was certain filled the room was 3 millimeters of paper. And from the inside, fear and excitement produced nearly the same arousal signature. Racing heart, tight chest, narrowed attention, everything sharp. Allison Woodbrooks showed that people who relabel that state as excitement instead of trying to calm themselves down perform measurably better under pressure, at singing, at speaking, at math done in front of strangers. Trying to get calm is a longer trip than trying to get ready. The body isn't issuing a verdict on whether you're qualified. It's issuing energy, and you have been reading the label wrong. Courage was never the absence of the physical response. It's the physical response plus one more sentence. So stop waiting to settle before you act. Say the words, "I am ready," rather than "I am afraid." Keep the shaking exactly where it is and start the sentence. Now notice what those four have in common, because everything so far has assumed the same shape. Strength was doing the thing, playing the 4 bars, asking the question, waiting out the silence, standing up with cold hands. Action under resistance. The next 4 reverse it. But before I go there, I want to say the objection out loud, because you're going to have it, and I'd rather have it with you than behind your back. It sounds like this. This is just a comfortable way of lowering the bar. Call the 4-bar day a win. Call the message you didn't send an achievement. Call the 90 seconds you spent asking for help a strength. And congratulate yourself into a smaller life. Somewhere in there is a version of this material that turns into permission. You've met people who use the language of self-compassion the way other people use a doctor's note. That objection deserves a straight answer, so here it is. Nothing in these 8 signs lowers a standard. Every one of them raises the price of the thing being measured. Playing badly on a flat day is harder than playing well on a good one. Asking a clarifying question while your face is hot is harder than walking out with your dignity intact. Sitting inside 24 hours of not knowing is harder than sending the message at midnight and getting the relief. Asking for help costs more than staying stuck. Every single sign here is the more expensive option, chosen at the moment nobody was checking. What actually gets lowered is your estimate of what those things cost you. And that is the error we're correcting. You have been running a system where the only entries that count are the ones with visible output, the finished thing, the good day, the win somebody saw. Under that system, most of your real work is invisible to its own owner. You've been doing the expensive thing and grading it as nothing. So no, this isn't permission, it's an audit. Because the strongest things you do are, mostly, things you don't do, and they generate no evidence at all. Nobody sees them. No moment, no witness, no story afterwards. That's precisely why you've never counted them as strength. You've been scoring yourself on a record of visible acts, while the real weight was being carried where nothing shows. 4 of them, starting with the most expensive kind of silence there is. Sign 5. You can let people be wrong about you. You leave a job. Some months later, a former colleague is telling a version of why you left, and it is not the version, and it reaches you sideways through someone at a wedding. That night you draft the message. You know the one. The timeline, the receipts, the 3 things they conveniently left out, and the 1 thing they got exactly backwards. You read it over at midnight with the room dark and the screen the only light in it. You don't send it. That non-action cost you more than any argument you have ever won, and it went into no ledger anywhere. Correcting every misreading of you is a dependency dressed as a principle, and the audience you were writing for barely exists. Gilovich and his colleagues ran the experiment that made this concrete. They put students in an embarrassing t-shirt and sent them into a room of people, then asked how many noticed. The wearers guessed roughly twice the real number. They called it the spotlight effect. Other people are not studying your case. They're rehearsing their own, in their own cars at their own midnights. Marcus Aurelius put the practical half of it in a single line. The best revenge is to be unlike the person who wronged you. Not to out-argue them, not to be publicly vindicated, to be unlike them and to keep moving. So write the rebuttal. Never send it. Then set the rule and hold it. You correct the record only when it changes a real outcome, a job, a court, a child. Everything else, you let stand and you outlast. If almost nobody is watching as closely as you assume, That raises a harder question about the parts of your life nobody is watching at all. Not underwatched, unwatched. The rooms with no door, the work with no photograph. Sign 6. You do the part nobody will ever inspect. Start with the research, because it explains the behavior better than the behavior explains itself. In an experiment by Lepper, Green, and Nisbet, preschoolers who already loved drawing were given a reward for drawing. When the reward stopped, they drew less than they had before it started. The prize had quietly eaten the reason. This is why applause makes such a poor engine. Anything you only do for the watching stops the moment the watching does, and it takes a piece of the original wanting with it when it goes. Now watch what the opposite looks like when it's operating. A cabinet maker sands the underside of a drawer. Not the face, not the sides, the underside, the surface that will spend 30 years 2 millimeters above a runner in the dark. No client will ever put a hand there. No photograph will include it. It adds 40 minutes to the job and nothing to the price. Ask him why, and you won't get a speech about excellence or craft or legacy. He'll shrug and say it would bother him. Move this same behavior into a hospital at 4 in the morning. A night nurse is halfway through her shift on a ward where nobody is awake. She stops at the end of a bed and reads back through a chart she has already read once, because a number from 6 hours ago is sitting slightly wrong in her memory. It takes 11 minutes. She checks it against the earlier entry, finds the discrepancy is nothing, writes a short note anyway so the day staff will see she looked. No one will audit that note. There is no scenario in which anyone praises her for it, and the most likely outcome by a wide margin is that it never matters. She does it because the alternative is going home at 7 and wondering. That instinct, the unwillingness to leave a small thing unverified when nobody would know, is the same instinct as the drawer. It is doing more of the world's quiet work than every visible act of heroism combined. The Stoics tested a man by what he did in private, and they weren't being romantic about it. Private conduct is simply the only conduct with no audience available to falsify it. So find one thing you've been doing for visibility, and one thing you'd still do if the audience were deleted tomorrow. Protect the second one. It's the load-bearing wall of your character, and it's the one you've been calling unimportant because nobody has ever congratulated you for it. The next one is the most expensive on this list to actually practice, and it's the one people fail most confidently, because failing it looks from the inside exactly like self-respect. It asks you to spend the thing you've been protecting the whole time. Sign 7. You can ask for help without losing your standing. You're 40 minutes into a task you cannot do. You've read the same instructions 6 times, and the 6th reading was worse than the first.
The person 2 desks away could resolve it in 90 seconds. You know this. You've watched them do it for someone else. You don't ask. You keep the tab open and the shoulders tight, and you protect an inch of some ranking that exists nowhere outside your own head. Now play the other version, the one where you stand up. You walk the 4 meters. You say, "I'm stuck on the export step. Do you have 2 minutes?" They say, "Yeah, hang on," and finish the line they were typing. Then they turn their chair. They look at your screen for about 11 seconds, point at a field halfway down and say, "That has to be set before you run it. Everyone hits that." You say, "Thanks." They say, "No problem. Ask me next time before you spend an hour on it." You go back to your desk. Total elapsed time under 3 minutes, and the entire emotional event you had built in your head, the judgment, the filed away note about your competence, the small permanent loss of standing, does not occur. It doesn't occur because it was never going to. It existed only in the 40 minutes you spend avoiding it, which is where it always lives. That gap between what you expect and what happens has a name. Brooke and colleagues called it the beautiful mess effect. We judge our own vulnerability far more harshly than the people watching it. who tend to read the identical act as courage.
Benjamin Franklin worked out the social half of it centuries before anyone was measuring. He found that asking a rival for a small favor made the rival like him more, not less. Refusing help is image management, and it bills you in hours. You are not imposing a debt. For most people, most of the time, an ask is an invitation, and they take it gratefully. So this week, ask one person for one specific thing before you've earned the right to. Small, precise, no apology attached to the front of it. Then watch what happens to your standing, which is nothing, and what happens to the relationship, which is not nothing. And that leaves the eighth, the one I told you at the start you'd have the most evidence for and the least credit for. This is the entry you crossed out. You lived through the thing you were certain would end you, and then you found a way to make it not count. Sign 8. You already survived what you were sure you couldn't. Go back 3 years. Sit down across from that version of yourself and describe in full detail exactly what was coming. The diagnosis with the date on it, or the phone call that came at the wrong hour and changed the shape of every room in the house, or the month the number in the account went where it went, and the arithmetic you did at the kitchen table with a pen, twice, hoping for a different result.
Or the night the person you'd built a life around said the sentence, and you heard the fridge running in the silence afterwards. Describe all of it. Then ask that earlier version, sitting there, whether they could survive it. They'd say no, not modestly, not fishing, genuinely. They would look at what's coming and tell you it isn't survivable. And they'd be wrong, which you know, because here you are, listening to a voice in your ears, still making decisions about a future. Daniel Gilbert and Timothy Wilson spent years documenting this exact error and gave it a name, the impact bias. People consistently overestimate how intensely a bad event will hurt them and how long the hurt will last, because they cannot see their own recovery machinery in advance. It isn't visible from the near side. It only ever switches on once you're in there, which means the version of you doing the predicting is always working from an incomplete inventory of what you're made of. Your imagination has never once correctly predicted your capacity. It has a perfect record of being wrong and always in the same direction. So write down the 3 worst things that have already happened to you. Next to each one, write the date you were still functioning, still eating, still working, still answering messages, however badly. That list is a load rating.
And the number on it is considerably higher than the one you've been operating from, which is the whole thing I promised you at the start, and it comes down to something smaller than it sounds. You have not been short on strength. You have been short on bookkeeping. You kept waiting for strength to announce itself as a sensation, as confidence, as calm, as the sudden absence of fear. And when the sensation didn't come, you concluded the strength wasn't there either. But it never arrives as a feeling. It arrives as a record, and it arrives late, and it arrives without ceremony. The 4-bar days, the clarifying question you asked instead of the defense you'd already have built. The 24 hours you sat inside without opening the oven door. The sentence you said at the meeting with your hands cold. The message you wrote at midnight and never sent. The underside of the drawer. The 90 seconds you finally asked for. And the thing you came through and then refused to put your name to. That's the ledger. You've been keeping it for years. So go back to that Tuesday, the one you barely got through, the one you told nobody about, the one you've been quietly holding against yourself as proof of something. Read it again with what you know now.
You were tired, and you were uncertain, and you did it anyway. And then you gave yourself no credit because it didn't feel like anything. That's not the exception in your record. That is your record. That was the strength, wearing the only clothes it owns. Tonight, pick the one sign out of the 8 that made you uncomfortable when you heard it.
the one where something in you shifted slightly and wanted to move past it. That's the one your evidence is strongest on. That's the one you've discounted hardest. Don't do anything ambitious with it. Just stop crossing it out. This channel is for people who'd rather be told the truth than cheered at. If that's you, stay close. There's more where this came from. For now, sit with the 8 and let the record stand.